Today let's discuss how to properly harvest and store your asparagus. If you're anything like me, you've seen a lot of different opinions and you've read a lot of material online about the best ways to not only harvest them, but to store them as well. And it's confusing and you want to make sure that you get it right, because after going to all the work and waiting for the asparagus to come up, you don't want to go and damage those crowns by harvesting them in the wrong manner. Also, once you've harvested them, you want to make sure that you preserve those precious spears for as long as possible so you can enjoy them while the season lasts. Welcome to True Freedom Permaculture, where I show you all the tips and tricks you need to have a green thumb, even if you weren't born with one. Let's head out to the garden. So before we even begin harvesting, one thing that's really important to note is that I don't harvest the spears for as long as the crowns are generating them. You really only want a window of maybe 6 to 8 weeks of harvest. The reason is that the spears eventually develop into ferns, and it's through these ferns while they're green that photosynthesis occurs. So the ferns are converting light into energy that's stored at the crowns and allows them to regenerate and produce spears for the following year, which is what you want. You want an asparagus harvest year after year, especially after you waited for 3 years to get your harvest. So that is the reason why we want to allow these ferns to happen. It's the beginning of May right now, so I will harvest asparagus spears all through May and all through June, and then at the beginning of July I'll start to pull back probably and just allow the spears to convert into ferns. You don't want to do it too early because first you want the spears to eat, but also you don't want the ferns to be shading out the other asparagus spears that are growing. Something else you'll notice is that the spears right now, it's the beginning of the season like I mentioned, so I can get away with harvesting every other day or maybe 2 days in between harvests, but it'll really start gearing up in the middle of the season and you'll have to harvest every single day in order to keep on top of the growth. Now, it kind of has this arc and it'll start to slow down eventually again, and that's another really good sign that you should start letting these spears grow into the ferns. Now, as for harvesting the asparagus, the debate has always been whether or not to cut the asparagus with a knife at or above the soil line or beneath the soil, or by simply breaking it off by hand. And what I wanted to do is figure out the reasoning behind all of these opinions on how to harvest asparagus first, so I could really understand why they came to that conclusion and then form my own opinion. So here is my asparagus. It's amongst the horseradish, and I think that this is a rogue blueberry. I have to make sure of that. That is growing behind it. But I just wanted to show you the various techniques and what they say about them. So first is cutting the asparagus with a knife, either at the soil line, I don't know if you can see that, at the soil line, or above the soil line. And I suppose the argument for that is to have a clean break. The second option is, again, using your knife, but people recommend that you cut it actually beneath the soil line in order to preserve the woody stem portion of the asparagus in order to keep the spear from drying out. Then there's the option of breaking them off by hand like this at their natural breaking point, which means that the entire spear is tender. I think it's a faster method, and you don't have to worry about sterilizing your knife in between or before in order to minimize the spreading of disease. Now, I will say that if you are preparing your asparagus to be sold commercially at a market or something like that, you'll probably want to opt for cutting the asparagus beneath the soil line in order to preserve that woody stem, to keep them from drying out and keep them looking good so that you can have that span of time before it hits the market or wherever you're going to sell it, that it still looks good to the consumer. The storage technique that I'm about to show you is not going to work for that, so that's why I suggest doing it a bit differently if you're going to sell commercially. That being said, let's go ahead and head to my kitchen and I will show you how I've found it's best to store asparagus for the home gardener. Okay, so we have our freshly picked asparagus from the garden, and now we're ready to store it. So I will show you what I do. There are a couple different methods. So there are these reusable produce bags. They're made out of nylon, and I have found that I need 2 of them to store asparagus, one inside the other, and then you just put the asparagus inside the bags. And that will last for a couple days in the fridge. I don't think that the results are the best. From my experience, they usually either dry out or they get kind of rubbery and weird and sad, just kind of soggy. So I don't really like doing that. And I know that you can use plastic bags too. You might have a little bit better luck with that. I find that the produce bags are more permeable than plastic bags, which is why I use 2 of them. If you use plastic bags, you probably only need 1. If there's alternatives to using single-use plastic, then I like to do it. So just kind of help the planet out if we can. Now, what I have found works best for storing asparagus spears is this. I take a small glass jar, or a big one if you're harvesting a lot of asparagus, and I'm going to pour about 1 inch or 2 of water in it. You just want enough to cover the ends of the asparagus. So remember, we hand harvested these, so they are more susceptible to drying out. But if you put them like this in a glass jar, then that will solve that problem. Just simply stick it in your fridge this way. This should last you for up to a week. You might have to change out the water once or twice during that time period, but honestly, it keeps the asparagus very crisp but tender, and they don't dry out. I think it's so simple. And again, going back to the plastic thing, I have seen some people where they take a plastic bag and they put it over the whole thing. And again, that might help you out a little bit, but I'm like, if I can keep asparagus good for a week, then that gives me ample opportunity to use it. So I just skip the plastic bag altogether. This is especially helpful in the beginning or the end of asparagus season when you might only be pulling a couple spears of asparagus per day. So this way it allows you to store them nicely in order to accumulate enough that you need for a recipe or whatever you're making. Now, if you have a lot of asparagus and you're looking for longer term storage, freezing it works really well. This is great for when you have so much asparagus you just can't keep up with it. Or maybe there was a sale on asparagus at the store. I know it can be pretty pricey sometimes, so you want to buy in bulk and preserve it so that you can use it when you need it. So this time I am actually going to use a plastic freezer bag instead of a glass container, which nothing against that. I think using a glass container to freeze things is great, but honestly right now my freezer is a little packed. I am laying it out in a plastic bag because it will save us some room. First, I simply give the spears a rinse if they need it. These were pretty clean, so I actually skipped that step. And now I'm going to cut the spears into 1 to 2 inch pieces so they're ready to throw into whatever dish you're planning on making, or they can be a quick and easy side dish all by themselves. I'm going to blanch the asparagus. While I was preparing my asparagus, I brought about 1 inch of water up to a boil in a medium saucepan. Now honestly, this blanching step is optional, but I personally feel that it's worth it because the blanching helps to preserve the color, retain nutrients, and it removes some of the enzymes which causes the asparagus to spoil. Now I'm going to add my pieces of asparagus to the boiling salted water. Now I'm going to leave the asparagus in the boiling water for about a minute. And by the way, you can also do this with whole spears of asparagus. You don't have to cut them up. I just know that the way I use asparagus, I tend to use it more when it's cut up into pieces, so that's why I did that. If you're going to be using the whole spears, you'll need to blanch them for anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes, depending on the thickness of your spears. While my asparagus is cooking, I prepared an ice bath just by throwing some ice cubes into a medium-sized bowl of water. Asparagus should be done now, so let's take the lid off and see what we've got. Well, they look pretty good to me. So I'm going to use my slotted spoon to quickly get these pieces of asparagus into my prepared ice bath. That way it stops the cooking and prevents them from being overcooked. After a few minutes in the ice bath, I'm going to lay these asparagus pieces onto a clean towel to dry off a little bit. And I'm going to eat that one. Finally, I'm gonna load them all up into my plastic bag for freezing, and that's it. It's really that easy. I've seen some people diligently lay out each piece of asparagus and freeze it on a sheet pan that way with none of them touching, but for me, just freezing them in a single layer in a plastic bag works well enough, and I like to take shortcuts when I can. Well, I hope this video has helped you with enjoying your asparagus, and I really think, in my opinion, it is one of the most rewarding crops to grow. And if you're seeing asparagus come up in your area right now, most likely you're also seeing daffodils. And if you're interested in learning about how daffodils can help out your edible landscape, you can click on the video coming up and I will meet you over there. I'll see you soon.